The world was still cold when it began. Ice crawled across the mountains like a living creature, swallowing everything it touched. The wind carried no voices then, only the howls of beasts and the heartbeat of fire. But somewhere beneath that silence, two kinds of humans were moving toward each other, unaware that history itself was holding its breath. They did not meet as strangers. They met as reflections. One carved from endurance, the other from imagination. One born to survive the world, the other born to change it. The Neanderthal stood unshaken against the storm, his body built by generations of winter. The Sapiens watched him from the shadows, thin, trembling, but carrying a spark that refused to die. There were no kings, no borders, no words for destiny, only hunger, only fear. The Neanderthal saw a rival. The Sapiens saw an opportunity. Every encounter was a question the Earth itself seemed to ask. Which form of humanity would the future remember? It was not one battle. It was 1,000 winters of quiet tension. A war fought in silence, written in the rhythm of birth and extinction. Sometimes they traded. Sometimes they killed. Sometimes they shared a fire and did not sleep. But beneath every gesture lay the same truth, too ancient to speak. Only one would endure. The Neanderthal had strength. The Sapiens had story, and story cuts deeper than any blade. When the last ice melted, only one remained to name the world. The others survived only in whispers of blood, fragments of memory, and in the hollow silence that follows victory. Before there was history, there was breath. Before there were nations, there was ice. The earth was young and merciless, its surface shifting between storm and silence. In that vast emptiness, humanity was not one, but many. They walked the same soil, but they weren't the same. Homo erectus wandered endlessly, chasing horizons that never ended. Homo floresiensis lived in the shadows of volcanoes, small and fierce as birds of prey. The Neanderthals ruled the frozen valleys of the north, heavy with strength, built for endurance. And far to the south, in lands of dust and light, a fragile tribe was learning to dream. Homo sapiens. The Neanderthals were creatures of discipline. Their hands shaped tools with precision. Their minds remembered every hunt, every loss. They survived through habit and memory. Fire was warmth, not symbol. The hunt was survival, not story. Theirs was a world without illusion, a world that existed only in the present tense. But sapiens were different. Their eyes lingered longer. Their minds stretched beyond what was visible. They spoke to shadows, worshipped the invisible, and feared what had not yet happened. They invented meaning where there was none. That was their strength. That was their danger. When a Neanderthal killed an animal, the hunt ended with death. When a sapiens killed an animal, the hunt began with belief. The difference was small, but destiny often hides in small things. For thousands of years, the two worlds drifted closer. Ice carved the earth into labyrinths of stone and silence. Forests shifted. Rivers froze. And through this moving wilderness, the sapiens walked north, step by step, season by season, until the horizon itself changed color. The first meeting did not happen with violence. It happened with recognition, a moment suspended between instinct and awe. Two species looked at each other and saw something terrifyingly familiar. Same posture, same fire in the eyes, same spark of knowing. Perhaps they exchanged nothing but a stare. Perhaps one raised a weapon and the other stayed still. Or perhaps there was no sound at all, only the sound of wind passing between them, heavy with prophecy. They could not know what they had begun. That this meeting would end with only one of them still breathing. That memory would one day erase half of what it meant to be human. The Neanderthals went back to their caves. The Sapiens continued their journey. Between them lay only time, and time has never been kind. For in every century that followed, the balance shifted. The Sapiens multiplied, painted their dreams on stone, whispered to the dead, and built invisible empires inside their minds. The Neanderthals endured, patient, strong, certain that the earth belonged to them. But survival favors not the strongest, only the most adaptable. And so, without war, without hatred, without even intention, one world began to fade, while another caught fire. The ice still covered the mountains. The wind still howled through the bones of the earth. But something in the rhythm of existence had changed forever. Two kinds of humans had walked the same world. Only one would remain to tell the story. For a brief moment in the long breath of time, the world held two humanities. Not rivals yet, not allies, but two reflections of the same spark, one steady, one restless. The ice had begun to shift, the forests trembled under its weight, and between the rivers of melting frost, their paths finally crossed. The Neanderthals came first, guardians of an older world. They knew every scent of the wind, every shadow of the hunt. Their lives were carved from habit and endurance. They spoke little, if at all. Their language was the rhythm of breath and bone, the ritual of survival. The Sapiens arrived like a rumor, quiet but persistent. They carried no greater strength, no sharper tools. What they carried was something else, the ability to imagine what did not yet exist, to see the world not as it was, but as it could be. When they met, the air itself seemed to pause. The Neanderthal stood still, his breath fogging in the cold, his muscles heavy with caution. The Sapiens watched him from a distance, thin, trembling, but unafraid. Two versions of humanity, born from the same fire, facing each other for the first time. Perhaps they traded. Perhaps they fought. Perhaps they stood in silence, uncertain whether they were enemies or kin. History has forgotten the details, but the bones remember. The bones whisper that they touched. They mixed. They became one for a moment before becoming separate again. For some, coexistence was brief and brutal. The Neanderthals defended their valleys, their caves, their dead. The Sapiens spread like wind through tall grass, adapting to every hunger, every season. They learned the language of the stars, the patterns of the hunt, the stories of the fire. Each story made them stronger, each belief made them many. But even as they mingled, the balance tilted. The Neanderthals were bound to the present. Sapiens could see beyond it. One lived the world as it was, the other dreamed it into what it would become. And still, not every encounter ended in blood. There were nights when fear softened, when survival gave way to something older than war, when two bodies, born of different histories, shared warmth against the cold. In those nights, the world held its breath again, and new lives were conceived. The proof still lives inside us, in our bones, in our blood, in the silent fragments of Neanderthal DNA that shaped the curve of a brow, the endurance of a lung, the persistence of memory. We are not pure. We never were. We are a collage of what survived and what was lost. The Neanderthals faded, but they did not vanish. They live inside our cells, hidden like ghosts who refuse to die. Every breath we take carries their echo. Every heartbeat remembers the moment when two bloodlines met and changed the meaning of being human forever. The world did not end with their disappearance. It simply grew quieter. And in that silence, the Sapiens began to dream of eternity. There was no trumpet to announce it, no battle to remember. The war between the two humanities began in silence, It was not fought with blades or stones, but with time itself. It started with hunger, a winter that lasted too long, a herd that never returned, a river that froze deeper than before. In that hunger, choices were made. Some tribes moved, others stayed. The Neanderthals trusted the world they knew. The Sapiens trusted the world they imagined. And imagination moves faster than memory. The Neanderthals were bound to the rhythm of the earth. They followed the seasons, the migrations, the same ancient roots that had kept them alive for centuries. Each step was an inheritance from their ancestors. Each tool was the repetition of an old idea. But the Sapiens were restless. They changed with every season. When the cold deepened, they built. When the forests burned, they adapted. When the hunt failed, they invented. They turned survival into creation. It was not a war of strength, it was a war of mind. The Neanderthals were creatures of precision, masters of their craft. Yet their certainty became their cage. The Sapiens made mistakes. They failed often. But from every failure, they learned. Every mistake was a seed, and those seeds grew. At first, they lived side by side, a valley for one, a forest for the other. But valleys shrink, and forests end. When the herds began to disappear, so did peace. There were confrontations, short and violent, forgotten by mourning but remembered by instinct. And instinct began to change. The Sapiens grew bolder. They hunted in groups larger than any the earth had seen. They planned. They imagined the movement of animals before it happened. They used language not only to warn, but to dream. Words became weapons sharper than stone. The Neanderthals fought back. Their bodies could crush. Their hands could kill. But their numbers dwindled. The cold grew heavier. The land no longer answered their strength. And so the war continued, not in open battle, but in generations. One species rising as the other faded, like two flames feeding from the same dying air. In the end, it was not hatred that decided the outcome. It was imagination. The Sapiens learned to believe in things they could not see. Spirits, futures, gods. The Neanderthals saw the world. The Sapiens saw beyond it. And the moment humanity learned to dream, the war was over. The Neanderthals vanished into the frost, their voices swallowed by time. The Sapiens stayed, alone beneath a sky that suddenly seemed much larger. Victory came quietly. No one celebrated, because in the silence that followed, the victors realized something terrible. They had won the world, but they had lost their reflection. Extinction is never complete. It leaves fingerprints on the living. For a time, the world seemed empty. The caves that once echoed with Neanderthal fire were silent now. Their tools lay buried under dust and frost. Their tracks were washed away by melting snow. To the Sapiens, the land looked conquered. But the earth never forgets. They thought the others were gone. Yet in the blood of their children, something ancient still whispered. A shadow of strength, a fragment of endurance, the memory of a world that had once belonged to more than one kind of human. It began quietly. Two bodies seeking warmth in the same night. Two instincts crossing in the cold. There were no names for love or survival then. Only contact, only breath. And from that fragile collision, a new lineage emerged. The Neanderthal and the Sapiens were not meant to mix, but they did. The borders of species blurred under hunger and firelight. From those unions came children who carried both the muscle of the past and the mind of the future. They were not pure, but they were powerful, hybrids of memory and imagination. Generations passed. The Neanderthals vanished from the valleys, but their blood did not die. It hid in the cells of the survivors, silent but awake. Thousands of years later, it still lingers. in the bones that heal faster, in the lungs that hold more air, in the calm that comes before fear. We like to think we are alone, that our story began with us. But inside every heartbeat, there is a ghost that never left. We are built from their endurance, their silence, their final surrender. When we lift a stone, when we fight the cold, when we survive against what should have killed us, it is their strength that answers. The Neanderthals did not disappear. They became part of us. Their extinction was not an ending. It was an inheritance. And yet, deep in the collective memory of sapiens, something uneasy remains. A question that hums beneath the surface of every dream. If we carry the blood of those we replaced, then who will carry ours when we are gone? The world grew quiet after the others vanished. The valleys no longer echoed with many voices. The mountains no longer watched over different fires. Only one kind of human remained, walking through the silence like a god who had forgotten why he was made. At first, it must have felt like triumph. The land was open. The herds were theirs. The fear of the unknown had ended. But silence is a dangerous reward. It begins as peace, then becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, sapiens saw not victory, but loneliness. They had inherited the earth, yet something was missing. The familiar tension of the hunt, the reflection in another's eyes, the sense of not being alone in the story of the world. The absence of rivals became the birth of anxiety. They had no one left to measure themselves against, so they turned inward. The war outside became the war within. In caves and forests, they began to dream of what was lost. They told stories of creatures that walked like men, but weren't men. Spirits in the hills, shadows in the snow, memories wearing masks of fear. The first myths were born from guilt. The first gods were shaped from solitude. They began to worship what they had destroyed. It was not enough to survive anymore. They needed to believe survival had meaning. They painted their walls with images of the hunt, not to record it, but to make it eternal. The sapiens could not live with silence. They filled it with imagination. They filled it with ghosts. But imagination is a double-edged gift. It can create beauty, but it can also breed fear. The same mind that invented art also invented shame. The same heart that created gods also created monsters. In conquering the world, they had unleashed something that could not be hunted or killed. The burden of awareness. The Neanderthals had strength. The sapiens had story. But story carries a price. To imagine is to remember, and to remember is to grieve. Every fire that burned through the night reminded them of what had been lost. Every silence carried the echo of another kind of voice, and though they stood alone at the top of creation, they could never escape the question that shadowed their victory. If we were the ones who survived, why does it still feel like something in us died too? When the last Neanderthal breath faded, the earth exhaled. For the first time, the world belonged entirely to one species. The ice melted. The forests stretched wider. The rivers carried no reflection but our own. Humanity had won. Yet victory felt hollow, as if the air itself mourned what had been erased. The sapiens spread across continents, carrying fire and language, dreams and fear. They built new shelters, carved new gods, sang new songs. But something followed them, a silence too heavy to ignore. It moved through their stories, hiding in the corners of their imagination. The silence of those who came before. Sometimes they saw shapes in the fog. Sometimes they heard voices in the caves. They whispered about spirits that looked almost human. They feared them. They missed them. Deep down, they knew what those shadows were. Memory made flesh, the echo of themselves. Alone beneath the vast sky, they began to speak to the wind, to stones, to stars. Anything to fill the void. They called it worship. They called it hope. But it was loneliness that built the first religion. It was grief that gave birth to meaning. The Neanderthals had vanished, yet their absence defined everything that came after. Their extinction gave sapiens the illusion of purpose. Their silence became the stage on which we built our history. The world no longer answered back, so we learned to answer ourselves. And so began the endless conversation between man and his reflection, between what was lost and what remained, between memory and invention. The last war between humans never truly ended. It still echoes inside us, in every instinct that remembers the cold, in every fear of being forgotten, in every story told to make the silence less unbearable. We are the children of victory, yes, but we are also the heirs of extinction, and somewhere in our blood, the others still breathe.